I'm going to talk about some essential questions. Well, the areas where the key questions are is pretty easy for us. They're, who are we? What do we care about? How do we relate to the people around us? And also, what's our relationship with technology? We simply can't get away from that because that is the sea that we're all swimming in. That is the situation that we're dealing with. And we reveal ourselves, as you could see with so many of the speakers, where you kind of know where they're coming from, particularly about their issues with technology. But I like to be a little bit more aggressive about these sorts of things with questions. And that helps us in these explorations and sort of leads us into a lot of very sort of juicy exchanges, the kinds that we have at a place like this, and the reason that we come to a place like this. So I thought that it would be, instead of talking about questions initially, that I would just pose a few questions. Unfortunately, the lights are so high, I can't see the way people respond, but maybe I'll be able to get out of the light for a moment. So the first one is about our relationship with technology. And that's, you have three choices. You have to give up one of these three things. And the question is, which is going to handicap you the most? So which do you want to give up? The first one is motorized vehicles. So you have no use in any way of cars, planes, trains, buses, anything with a motor. You cannot use it for the rest of your life. The second is phones, telecommunications, computers, all of the digital kind of media. So no access to the internet, no ability to use a phone, none of those sorts of things. That's the second one that you give up for the rest of your life. And the third is you lose one of your hands. You can pick the one. So those are the three choices. How many here, raise your hands, would choose motorized vehicles? I can't see, yeah, a few. And how many would choose digital media, the phones and everything? And how many would choose their hand, a hand? Do I have to be awake? No, you get full anesthesia and you can pick the hand. So I can't see. It looks like about 20% or something. It's hard for me to see that. I would, although I don't know how I would work my phone if I lost a hand. So what's interesting there is that we're at a stage in our social evolution at which we really would think of giving up a hand. And it's really interesting to me because you see these Arnold Schwarzenegger and, the cyborg, the union of man and machine, of flesh and machine. And, we're already there with an entity called a cyborg, a functional cyborg, where we are so intimately connected with our technologies, and they're only going to get more and more intimately associated with us, that we feel naked without them, just as we would without our clothes. The second question is one that is very akin, but a little bit harsher question than we just had with the Detroit Institute of Art. If you have a choice, let's make it with some sort of an evil sorcerer that takes you, and you have to make the choice of the Louvre. Now there are about 20,000 visitors a day in the Louvre, and you have to choose between the art and the people. In other words, either every person who is in the Louvre on a particular day is going to die of a heart attack suddenly, 20,000 people, or else all of the art, and including the 95% that's below the surface, is going to be vaporized and is going to disappear permanently forever. So the heart of European culture in many ways. How many people, and it's your choice, and if you don't choose, then both will be disposed of. So in the audience, how many people would choose to let the people disappear? A few, I can't see very well. And art? So it's interesting, and most people here would be willing to let the art be sacrificed. What's interesting is that so many people, millions of people, will sacrifice their lives in a war in order to preserve the cultural heritage of a nation, of a country. We just had some eloquent discussion of what it means to the city of Detroit to have a museum. And so it's interesting that our choice is that we would say, certainly future generations would probably wish that we had made the other choice rather than save the people, I would guess. The third question that I want to ask is about relationships. Assume that you're not involved with anyone at the moment. So you're single, you're alone, and you look over at a table, a couple of tables over from you here at the meeting, and you see somebody, and you know absolutely certainly that if you go over and talk to that person, you feel nothing at the moment. If you go over and talk to that person, you're going to fall so in love. It's going to be magical. It's going to be 10 times more powerful than anything you thought possible. And it's going to be completely reciprocated. It's going to be the stuff of dreams. And the only catch is that you also know with certainty that in 6 months, they're going to step off a curb, be hit by a transit bus, and killed. And so your choice is, do you get up and walk away, or do you go over and embark on that experience? So how many would go for the experience? Many. And how many would walk away? Yeah. It's often about 50-50 with that, and usually the people cannot imagine what the other people are thinking. It's like if you were one of the ones that was going to walk away, you'd say, are you an idiot? You're going to subject yourself to that level of pain. You'll never find love again like that. You're going to destroy your life. And the people who would go over say, well, you don't get 15 minutes of that in your life. How could you not accept that gift? So these are the kinds of things that I've captured a whole bunch of them in that book. And before continuing with questions or discussing the sort of nature of questions, I want to sort of discuss the context in which these are occurring. And a key question that I have, which is not so personal a one, but it's, why are so many people so unhappy with the state of our world today? And we saw this yesterday when there was the interesting presentation by John Haidt, who was talking about living happily ever after, that this is, you project into the future, things are going to get better and better. What a time to be alive. Or when Lewis Lapham was talking about that we're going to face a massive die-off where that's probably the only way that the population is going to be culled, but maybe it doesn't matter because they're illiterate and can't think anyway. So and that's a little bit strong statement of that, but it's really not a very happy view of the future. So I don't know. I often find that people are not very grateful and excited about being alive at this present era. And I would like to ask that question, which is how many of you feel more really just lucky to be here and now at this period, at this era, not as opposed to non-existence, but as opposed to some other potential era in our history? And who just feels extraordinarily fortunate to be alive right now, as opposed to any other time? Are there any other people who would like, at other periods, maybe they would prefer in history or something? Well, that's unusual. So everybody is very forward-thinking here. So I'm a little bit off the mark in terms of this group. But so many people feel that we're facing catastrophic things and that we will end up like Detroit is now, maybe. So to me, I think this is a unique, extraordinary moment in our history, and that it's an incredible privilege to be alive here, to be here to kind of watch what's going on, and that there are things that are absolutely without precedence that are going on now that are not just without precedence in human history, but in the history of life itself in the last 3 billion years. And what those things are is the following. First of all, there's the Silicon Revolution. And if you really think a little bit beyond your phones and what the reality of that is that we have taken the inert materials around us, silicon dioxide, the sand at our feet, and we're breathing a level of complexity into it that rivals life and that may soon recreate life. And so we're animating the inanimate dead world around us. And nothing is ever going to be the same. This is a transition point in the history of life. And the product of that revolution, the child of that revolution, is yet another revolution. And it required something that is another sort of development that's associated with that, is that we are now functioning so tightly interconnected, where we're interacting with people all over the world in ways that are every bit as intimate as the way our cells interact with one another in our bodies. There has been birth of a social kind of superorganism, which is far beyond metaphor. I've written a book about that. It's really, in reality, a biological construct has been born right now. And so this has led the biotech revolution to the biotech revolution, which is the second large revolution. And what that is, essentially, is that biology, through us and through this social organism and through the Silicon Revolution and such, has begun to understand its workings at a level of intimacy, of detail, and turned our technology back upon ourselves to where we're beginning to manipulate our own biology. So biology has begun to close the loop and is beginning to alter itself. And again, nothing is ever going to be the same. And to me, it wasn't surprising yesterday when we had Bruce Slavin talking about programs and algorithms sort of interacting with one another. That's part of that social organism, and that's the kind of thing that is really going on. We're just kind of embedded in this entity. And these are the kinds of things that are going to, shape the future, and they're certainly going to alter us, the component parts of that. And when you talk about biotech, it's really going to change our biology in the sense of very important things like lifespan, maybe. I mean, think of what it would do to double the human health span, for example. It'll change the way we manage emotional states. That's already going on, where take a very simple example of what if you could have a cocktail of pills? We really are beginning to understand brain function and pharmaceuticals in a way. What if you could have a cocktail of pills that made you feel just very, very fulfilled? No side effects. You were just happy to be doing whatever you're doing. Even if you're doing a schlock architectural project, God, I'm lucky to be doing this. So you just feel that way. Could you, and if you had access to that, would you take that? Would you take that pill just to feel fulfilled or not? How many would take it? Only a few. Because it's troubling, because who would you be if you took that pill? And yet, how could you not take that pill and feel really fulfilled? And those are the kinds of things. Our level of understanding about biology is such that we're beginning to short circuit all of the paths that have been in place through evolutionary development that cause us to behave and struggle and do things to gain those feelings. I mean, it's not surprising that sex feels good. I mean, it's a program to get us to reproduce. Or it's not surprising that sugar tastes good. I mean, that's a great thing to do, to go and get some ripe fruit somewhere. But we weren't meant to be living in a pastry shop where we devote a lot of our lives trying to curb our emotions. And the same thing with having access to pornography online, for example, which is difficult for many people. So to me, it's amazing to be alive now. And the reason that it's so challenging for so many people, and that a lot of people are very dissatisfied with the world today, is that it's so damn confusing and disorienting. And that's the context in which these questions occur, because we're unprepared to deal with the kinds of perceptions that we have today. They're unnatural. And by unnatural, I mean we evolutionarily have not developed evolved ways of dealing with, for example, looking at images of violence that are taking place across the world, and yet they're here in front of us in our living room. We're looking at them, or in our kitchen, or on our iPhone. So we react. We want to do something, but it's really beyond us unless we change our lives and devote our lives to some particular cause, because we react as though it's present. Of course we would react that way. Or to, we have a lot of time. We're not fighting to avoid starvation or to be suffering from exposure in the winter. Most of us are not dealing with that. We're not starving, we're not freezing. And so we're dealing with these abstract, sort of distant threats like global warming or GMOs. And we are very, very poor at calculating, balancing risks and rewards, at calculating relative risks. So it's very disturbing and difficult. And then choices. Suddenly we have so many choices around us. Lifestyle, we have to decide what to do. We have to decide what religion we're going to be. I mean, all these things that were kind of decided for us previously. Where we live, where we go to school, what kind of partner we'll have, what gender partner we'll have, if we're going to have kids. And if we decide to have kids, we have to decide how many and when. And maybe even the gender of them. And maybe we'll be making choices about their genetics. And when we die, we may have to decide, or our loved ones may have to decide when to pull the plug. This is a lot of responsibility. This is a lot of choices about things that we never had to worry about before. And so there's a lot of struggle with who we are and what all this means. And we struggle to carve a place for ourselves, I think, to make sense of it all, to find partners, to find companions in this journey, to guides, people who can help us. And, you know, it's an all too short journey, too. And that question, another question that I have, which I like, is, so I have a little envelope here. You each get one of them. And in it is written the precise date of your death. You can't change it. You know that it's true. And you have a choice. You can either return the envelope before you leave the room, or you can look at it. So the question is, how many would actually look at that envelope and look at that information? A few, quite a few. More, yeah, that's one that usually about 10% of people say they do. I mean, for me, it's obvious. I would look at it. Yeah. How could I not? I would probably change my schedule if it was going to be next week. But many people feel that they can't, that somehow they won't be able to live a life that they could enjoy if they knew that they're going to die at a particular time, although they do know that they're going to die. And so it's interesting in terms of how unresolved those issues are. And so the Book of Questions, which was just a little thing that I wrote, I do more serious things about science policy and about genetics and biotech and all sorts of things. I was kind of embarrassed about it initially. It was just a kind of a catalyst that I developed. But it's turned out to be the most rewarding thing that I've actually done, produced in my life. And that's because it's created connections, that it sold about 4 million copies. And I would get letters from people who got married because of the book, or that, you know, resolved conflicts, or whatever it would be, which the credit wasn't for me. It was just a little catalyst that got them interacting, and the power of those sorts of interactions, which are so much nicer than those ones that we do so often about politics or about religion or about so many issues, where we kind of get, I don't know if you've experienced, but I've experienced situations where I'm bored by what I'm saying myself. So how are other people feeling? And that's why we really like what Deborah's done here at Applied Brilliance, because it's something that carries us into a realm that we're not usually inhabiting in our day-to-day lives. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of energy. And so to me, it was the idea of having a tool that can generate that on a routine basis with people that are around us. And I've found that questions really do that. And they do it if they're kind of, what makes a good question, I guess, is what the issue is. To me, they have to be concrete. They have to capture things that are significant to us at a deeper level, that sometimes they kind of stick with us because they bring up an issue that is really a very difficult one to deal with. And they're accessible. They're in a expressed as something that really has an answer to it. But there's no right or wrong answer. They're just about who we are. When I first wrote this initially, people always wanted to do the answers. They always look for the back of the book for the answers. Or they want to know, if I answered this way to questions 5, 16, 142, and 27, then, I'm a warm person capable of interactions with other people. But there's none of that. It's just empty. Because otherwise, we try and give the right answers. And that's what's so fun about, there's a children's book. And so often I would go into schools and the teachers would be aghast that you would actually ask children open-ended questions about ethical dilemmas, about cheating, about lying, about things of that sort, without telling them what they should answer or really making it very clear in the formulation of the question how you should answer it. So that isn't the way these things are written. And I thought of a couple more related to technology. That's the main thing, is I really brought in a lot of new technology and such because it captures so many issues for us. One is, and I thought of it when Lewis spoke yesterday, is if you read a poem, you go home and you read a poem and it's so beautiful, it's so evocative, it's a sad poem that just touches you to the core. And then you look to see who wrote it, and it turns out it was written by a computer. So how does that make you feel? Do you feel okay with that? Or do you somehow feel that you were cheated in some way because probably it came out of some algorithm that was able to get insights into the kinds of things that would make you feel that way? And so who feels that it would be diminished, that experience would be diminished by the fact that it was a computer that did it? Yeah, kind of interesting, about half. So this is something that we're going to be deal with increasingly in all of the media and all of the things that we're exposed to, because so often it's like a dog. We've trained, the canines are trained to elicit responses with us. It's like they're so good at just making us love them. And that's the same way we're training our machines. We're domesticating our machines and devices and programs in order to give us what we want. And then we don't like it or we question it. Another is about the surveillance issue. So for me, it's obviously coming. There's going to be no privacy. And it comes up in genetics all the time where people are worried about genetic privacy. Well, is somebody going to know my DNA? And I go, well, of course, if they care enough. I mean, you leave a trail of biological debris behind you. I was sitting here at this table. Anybody just has to go over to my glass, and they can pull a few cells off of it. And it's getting very, very cheap and very easy to do that. So how can you possibly protect that information if anybody cares to know it? And so in terms of recordings, and I was thinking that to me, it's about who is recording whom and where that power is. And so there's a possibility that what really is required is it has to be reversed. What would happen if, I'm very suspicious of the motivation of politicians. I mean, maybe you aren't, but I am. And so what would happen if you insisted on, to serve our country in any important role, you actually had to have video and audio taping 24/7 around the clock of everything you did for that period while you were in office. And it would be put online after a period of 5 years or something like that. Nobody would be interested other than if there were great fraud involved or whatever. It would totally change the nature of government. So it's interesting to try and think about how these tools and these changes and the shifts that are coming can be made to serve us in one way or another rather than to diminish us. And then another aspect of questions is that they lead to additional questions. The one that I asked about, would you go over to another table and introduce yourself to that person and embark on that experience? Well, how does that shift if it's not 6 months, but it's going to be 5 years? For some people, that would be worse, because now it's clear that that is going to be a loss that is so fundamental. It's not just a little experience. For others, well, that would be great. Or what if instead of their so cleanly disappearing from your realm by getting hit by a bus, they actually are going to betray you so that it will cloud that memory of what that wonderful experience was. So we get to explore in the abstract things that maybe some others have experienced and told us, and many of these questions have come out of interactions where people relate something that actually happened to them, and you go, oh my God, what would that be like to face that yourself? Yet another aspect of these sorts of things is that they're a permission. By the fact this was popular because it was a little book that people could actually just open it up at random, and suddenly they could be asking someone a question like, if you're sitting on an airplane having a wonderful conversation with somebody, really nice person, and suddenly they said to you, and they turned to you and said, you know, I'm so attracted to you. I'll give you $100,000 if you'll spend the night with me. And you knew that absolutely it was going to be safe. There's no venereal disease. There's no issue that you're going to come out at the end of that with safe and with $100,000, and that actually no one else will know but you. Would you do that? So how many say that they would do that? Oh, I think people are a little hesitant to hear. Nice person. But that's not the kind of question you generally can come at somebody or would do out of nowhere. Put it in another way, another question like that. What if instead of a night of sex, it's you would do that for your pet? You have a pet that you care about, and to put your pet to sleep. For 100,000, would anybody do it? $1 million? People are so resistant to doing that, and yet, because it's so awful to think about that, and yet so many families are going, well, you know, my dog only has a couple of years to live, and now he has cancer, and I can't afford another $2,000 for the vet. And so, you know, there is a point at which you're lying to yourself, I believe, if you say that you would not, or you suffer a lack of imagination, if you can't think of ways that you could put that kind of resources to work in a way that would probably might cause you to question keeping a pet. For example, you could save the city of Detroit if the value was high enough, or your dog, one or the other. And then it's interesting that usually people are more willing to do having a night of sex than they are to forego hygiene for 3 months, which I've always thought is interesting because I think the reverse would have been the situation 100 years ago. People were probably a little less concerned about their hygiene. So what I would like now is, because I think the human experience is about the way we interact with one another, and it's about giving and receiving. And Deborah, did you put a book at each table? Will one person, somebody, stand up at a table? It can be whoever you want, just interact. One person at each table will stand up, please. Can we just get somebody to stand up? Each table, someone stand up. Okay. Now that person can pick up the book. And is somebody up at every table? I can't see. Okay. Pick up the book. And this is a gift to the table, but they get to decide who to give it to. So they get to either give it to somebody else, or if they choose, they can keep it themselves if they want to. So, you know, I just decided to do it that way because I was having trouble figuring out how to give these books out. And everybody was so into the bling of bingo last night that I thought it would be interesting, because that is, our relationships with others is a lot about how we give things and in the ways that we make those decisions and are comfortable with them, and about how we receive and acknowledge gifts that people give us, be they material or be they parts of themselves. So I thought it would be nice to bring that up. And I will close with coming back to that original question, which is, you know, why are so many people so unhappy with their place in the world, with the situation in the world? And it seemed like there weren't so many here. But I think the reason is that there are so many choices, which is very disorienting. And it's, for many people, it's not a gift, but it's a burden. The second is that the fact that real immediate threats have largely disappeared in a significant way, or at least they're greatly reduced, which gives us time to try and deal with a diversity of abstract threats. And we're very poor at it because we go for the dramatic. I mean, think of the amount of concern there was about anthrax versus, which, you know, kills a person or two maybe, versus automobile accidents, which is 35,000 a year, pretty solid in the knowledge of that, or flu, for example, which is the same number. There's also a lot of loss of place that we're very comfortable with, you know, being in a consistent location and with friends and family, which is much more distributed now. And I think it's also because we've raised the bar. Certainly, we're better off in every material sense now than we've ever been in our history. But so what do? We don't compare our success as a society with what was and where we've come from. But now we can envision all sorts of possibilities that suddenly seem feasible because we've been so successful. And now we gauge our success by how far we are from what we can imagine, which is something you never will reach, of course. And so to me, it's important to kind of be aware of that because it's so much nicer living in a world where you actually feel grateful for being there and feel excited about the privilege of being here to witness this amazing explosion, these incredible technologies that are here. And we're not just witnessing them, we're the ones that are doing this. We're the architects, and I feel very proud of that. And the challenge is, though, that we're the objects of all these changes. And so that's why we're so concerned about what the implications are.